All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for me. We'll go ahead and get started here. Got the echo. There we go. Had to turn the volume off there. Just trying to make sure that I'm getting the video on there. What are we seeing? Oops. Um, but yeah, if you got your questions, you can post them. It should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, like a phone. If you're on a larger screen, like a computer, it should be to the right of the video. Just a reminder, you can ask your questions at any time. We already got a couple questions in here for today, which is great. But yeah, you don't have to be here live to ask questions. You can ask your questions 24/7 at any time, and it will be answered at the next office hours, which is right now. And if you happen to not be able to make it to the live office hours, then all you have to do is go to the archived office hours, which you will see a link below the video here where you can do that. You can go to the archived office hours, and then you can see the answer to your question in there. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here with Dave F. Says, I have used the claw grip for putting for the past 2 decades because I tended to break down my wrists using a conventional grip. All right. The problem has affected my chipping for the same reason. What do you suggest I try to remedy this problem? Well, it's okay if the wrists are a little bit active. We don't want overly active. So the difference with kind of like putting versus chipping, in putting, you're going to have kind of firmer wrists, right? Because we're not trying to create any lag with the putter, right? We're going to have nice, firm wrists with the putter, right? So if I get out this putter, right, I don't want to have any of this action, right? And that's why you chose the claw grip, right? Because if we use the claw, right, and there's lots of variations to the claw, this is just kind of one of them here. But basically, if I use that, it's a little bit harder to do that. Now, I can do that, but it's a little bit easier to kind of lock that in. Now, there's pros and cons to the claw. I've tried the claw myself. In my experience, it was hard for me to control my distance quite as well, but I didn't really have a big problem with the being too risky. So, if I did have a big problem with that, I would just work on it a bunch and get better at controlling my distance because, I definitely don't want to have like the wristy, kind of stroke. I was doing it just kind of because I was, my putting was in a slump and I was just trying different things and maybe get back in a good spot. And, that was before I was an instructor and really knew what I needed to do and things like that. But yeah, so with the putter, my wrists are going to be more firm, right? Because I don't want to really create a lot of lag. But in chipping, I want to have nice soft wrists. Now, not that I'm going to create a lot of lag with soft wrists, but I just want my wrists to be nice and soft. There's several reasons for this. So one is that when your hands are softer and your wrists are softer, you're going to be able to feel the weight of the club head more, which means you're going to have a better sense and awareness for where this is. And that's very, very important for like chipping, for chipping and pitch shots, because there's some precision that needs to happen there to hit it close. And if we have more control of this, then we're going to have more control of those things. So when I chip, I don't have like the firm wrists, right? We're not trying to chip like this, right? I don't have a ton of wrist hinge, but I just let my wrists kind of naturally hinge a little bit in that transition. So basically, that would be kind of like this, right? And I just have nice, soft hands when I'm doing that, right? So that's all I would try to feel is understand with putting, I got nice, firm wrists. With chipping, it's a different kind of swing. It's not the exact same thing. Even if you're kind of doing like a bump and run shot where you're kind of turning off your lower body, right? And you're almost like you're taking a putting stroke. Even when you're doing that, I still want to have nice soft wrists and let the club hinge a little bit and let the club release a little bit, right? So if I was hitting, this kind of shot where I'm just kind of hitting a little bump and run, right? You can see how I'm in doing that. I'm just, I'm letting the wrist kind of hinge a little bit. Now, if it's a really it's a really short kind of bump and run where, it's only maybe like that, like what a putting stroke would be, then, I mean, you can take your putting grip and make a putting stroke and that will work fine, right? But generally, we're going to be taking more than a putting stroke with these chip shots, right? Which means we need to let the club hinge a little bit and we need to let it kind of release a little bit. Whereas with putting, you have nice firm wrists, you're not letting them hinge, and you're using basically your shoulders to move the putter back and forth, right? That's kind of your mechanism to get the club to move. With chipping, it's a little bit more dynamic. You're going to use your wrists, you're going to use your shoulders, your arms, your knees may even get involved a little bit, the hips, right? Depending on how long it is. So that's kind of the mindset that I would have, is that you want to let the club hinge a little bit. It's okay to have the hands involved with the chipping. We're not trying to chip everything like that. That's just not going to be very, very consistent, because with the longer stroke where we need to get a little bit more speed to chip the ball a certain distance, it's very difficult to be consistent and be so rigid with your wrists. So be a little bit softer with the wrists. Let that club hinge up a little bit. I'm not saying get a ton of lag with it. I'm just saying because it's a chip, we don't need a ton of speed, but we need more speed. The club head needs to be moving faster with a chip generally than it does for putting, right? One, because they're generally longer shots than most putts, right? And then also there's loft on this, right? A putter has very little loft. It has like 4 degrees of loft, right? If you're chipping with a wedge, that can have 56, 60 degrees of loft. If you have a BX1, you're chipping with 63 degrees of loft. That's a lot of loft. And you have to hit the ball with some speed. So having the hands in there, letting the hands be soft and letting this club hinge up a little bit and release will help you give that speed. Will also help you give you a little bit more control of it as well. So that's the mindset that I would take with it. Hopefully it makes sense. If that doesn't quite, if you feel like I'm not quite covering exactly what you're asking, maybe I'm misunderstanding exactly what the problem or the question is. But if you feel like that's off, just let me know. Give me a little bit more information. I'll try to help as much as I can. All right, let's keep going here. Okay, so Pete G says, Q, in the 20-minute shallow fix, Clay emphasizes the rotation of the wrist downwards towards the ground to create a bow in the lead wrist and the palm of the trail wrist sweeping the ground. Yet, when I watch Clay swing during the straight line release courses, it doesn't look like he's doing that. It looks like he's just coming down and rotating the wrist set at impact. Can you help with this confusion? So what we're doing in the 20-minute shallowing fix is we're trying to give you a lot of things to help you get that club face closed. Because a big reason why a lot of people struggle with shallowing out the club is because the club face is open, right? So the first thing that we can do to get the club face closed is to strengthen the grip, right? And that's where Clay takes you through that chopping progression, right? Where we turn the club over, we chop down, we chop a tree, we chop down, right? And then once we get here, we pause, and then we loosen our grip, square up the face, and then generally that's kind of the grip that you'd want to have. And for most people, it's going to be a grip that kind of looks like that, that's on the stronger side, right? So that's going to help you to get the club face closed. The reason why that's really, really important is that if my club face is very open at the top of the swing, and you may not realize this, but you're basically sensing that the club face is open. Well, one way that I can get the club face to point more in the direction of the target, let's say, my target is basically this wall right here, and my feet are perpendicular to that. If my club face is very open here at the top, what I may do is I may come down steep and over the top and swing the club to the left to get the club face to point in that direction, right? Because if my club face is very open and then I shallow out the club, well, what's going to happen is my ball's going to start right, and then it's going to slice more to the right, right? And our brain says that's not going to work. So what we do is we got to get that club face pointing more toward the target. So in doing so, you'll come down over the top and steep. And then that does get the club face more pointing toward the target, but your club face is still very open to your path, which is likely going to cause slices. Or maybe you get the club face too closed and you start hitting hooks or pulls or things like that. A lot of times you just don't make good contact in general when you come down steep. So the first thing that we got to do to be able to get you in a place where you're actually incentivized to shallow out the club is to get that club face more closed. So we do that with the grip first. And then the second thing that Clay talks about, or some of the other things that Clay talks about, is exactly what you mentioned, right? Turning this club face down to the ground, right? Now, if you imagine, let's say I got the strong grip, right? I got the strong grip. I got a super strong grip here. And then when I'm coming down, I really bow my wrist down. Well, look at my club face. I mean, that thing is crazy shut. If I were to literally hit a ball with that ball would start left and it would hook immediately. It would be, I might be scared for the person next to me in the bay because it's going to be so far left. I might even hit my ankle, my left ankle. These are feels. It's not literally what you want to try to literally do it, but it's an exaggeration to help you to get the club face closed, right? So yes, if you look at Clay's swing, he's probably not doing bowing the wrist way down and all that stuff. Most players aren't, but a lot of players who are coming down steep and have the club face open are doing the opposite. They have the wrist cupped, right? The wrist is very cupped. They have a weak grip. The wrist is cupped. The club face is wide open. I got to swing to the left and steep to be able to get the ball to go anywhere near the direction of the target. So these feels, right, of getting the stronger grip and then turning that handle down, these things, we want to literally do them at first to really get the ball to hook, to exaggerate it, because the fastest way to change anything in the golf swing is to exaggerate the opposite, right, and then tone it down. Because if you think about it, what happens if you literally exaggerated it, right? What happens if you get that really strong grip and you bow the wrist way down? What happens if you literally do that? Well, you're going to hit the hooks. And that's the goal of drill number 1, is to hit the hooks, right? Well, you're in a good spot at that point because now you've actually overdone what your problem was, right? The opposite of what your problem was. And now all you have to do is tone it down to get it. That's what you do in drill number 3, is where you tone it down to get it where it needs to be. But you may not be literally doing that. You just need to try to do it to get the club face more closed, right? So, you don't want to necessarily, look at exactly what's going on based on what we're saying, because a lot of what we're telling you to do are exaggerations of the opposite, right? If you're coming down, if the club face is very open, strengthen that grip like crazy. Get that club face shutting down, because a lot of people who try to literally do that, will have a little bit of a stronger grip, and then they might have the wrist a little less cupped. But it's the fault feel real approach, right? The fault is the club face is very open coming down. The feel is I'm going to get the club face way too close coming down, and hopefully the real is something in between there. But the good part is that if you literally do what you're feeling, that's a good thing. And all you have to do is tone it down. But most of the time, what happens is people just move closer to where they want to be, right? A lot of times what people do is they have the fault feel real approach where they're feeling like they're doing this, but the reality is it might be like that, where the wrist is more flat, right? So that's basically what it comes down to. So the goal here, if you're working through drill number 1, do everything you can, close that club face way down, get those balls hooking. It doesn't matter where it starts. It only matters that it hooks. It obviously hooks. Because if it's obviously hooking, then we know that the club face is closed, right? And if the club face is closed, now we actually have an incentive to shallow out the club, because if you were to have the club face way closed and come over the top and steep, the ball's now going to go left and left, right? So now we can have that club face closed. Now we're incentivized to swing this club out to the right, which is going to, for a right-handed golfer, which is going to help you to get the ball to start to the right and curve to the left, right? So hopefully that makes sense. But there are players that do literally bow the wrist, right? Victor Hovland, who won last week, the week, or not this past weekend, but the Valspar, I think is what he won. He bows his wrist. Generally, you only really need to literally bow your wrist if you have a weak grip. So if you look at all the best players who bow their wrist, so we're looking at there's one exception. Justin Johnson would be one exception of a golfer that bows his wrist, but doesn't have like a really weak grip. He has kind of more of like a neutral grip. And the reason that he does is he gets a crazy amount of shaft lean, way more than most players do. And when you have that much shaft lean, because shaft lean opens up the face. So when you have that much shaft lean, you have to have the face more closed. Right. And that's why his model is like that. And the other thing is that Dustin Johnson's wrist is like this at the top, but when he's coming down, it kind of goes to that. Right. So it's not as bowed at impact as it was coming down. So basically he has it like this, and then he actually kind of releases that bow a little bit. So it's not near as bowed, but it's still bowed, a little bit bowed at impact with a neutral grip, which makes it to where he has to have the hands way in front at impact, which is what he does. But if you look at golfers that don't have, they have like the normal amount of shaft lean that we typically see, John Rahm, Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, these are all golfers that bow their wrist, but also have a weak grip. So if you look at their grips, you're going to see thumbs are going right down the top of the shaft. That would be considered a weak grip. All right. So that's what you're going to see in those guys. And even if, let's say you have a weak grip and you don't bow your wrist, then what's likely going to happen is you're probably going to have a little bit of an earlier release, which isn't, necessarily a bad thing, right? As long as you're getting some shaft lean, that's really all you need is some, right? If you don't have some shaft lean, then it's going to be hard to make solid contact. Right? Because you're going to tend to hit the ground behind the ball. But if you have some shaft lean, then you will be able to hit the ball and then the turf. All right. Let me know if you have any more. If that wasn't clear, Pete, let me know, and I'll be happy to just let me know exactly what didn't make sense to you, and I'll be happy to explain it a little bit farther. All right. So Doug says, have been doing rotational stretching before practice, and it seems I lose club head speed. Any ideas? I think you either it's a coincidence, and I got the same question, I think, earlier in the week. A very similar question. Let me scroll up here. Yeah. So you asked it earlier in the week. I just want to make sure it wasn't like a coincidence. So yeah, I answered this question a little while back, earlier this week. But basically, they've actually done some research. I don't know the exact study or whatever it is, but I did see something about how doing static stretching, you tend to lose athletic performance. I don't know exactly why, but you tend to lose athletic performance when you do that. So generally what I would recommend doing to get loose, like before practicing, is to do more dynamic stretching, right? And what I do for dynamic stretching is I literally just swing the club, right? That's all I really do is I just swing the club. So I start out with kind of some shorter, slower swings, kind of going back and forth, just kind of getting, starting slow and just kind of building up. I like to kind of get loose like that because I'm loosening exactly what I'm trying to do, right? Which is swing the golf club, right? Now, if you have specific tight areas, there might be some other kind of dynamic stretches that you want to do. That's not my area of expertise. you may want to look into, you know, maybe some books. One that I would recommend would be a book by Joe Yoon. If you just go to Amazon and search Joe Yoon, I believe his book is called Starting Stretching or something like that. Um, he talks about some stuff in there, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing static stretching before you play or practice because, like I said, like I said, they did some research on it, and it seems like it does lower athletic performance. I don't understand exactly why. You know, I don't remember exactly why, but I do remember kind of seeing that. It does wear off after time, though, from what I remember, right? So I don't remember exactly how long the departure from athletic performance lasts, but it ends up. It's not like you stretch and then your athletic performance is going to go down every time you stretch. That's not it. It comes back, but there's something going on. I don't know if it's that you've stretched out the muscle and then you don't get that like contraction quite as well. There's something that Clay talks about, which is called the stretch shortening cycle. So that's basically if you imagine like a muscle kind of stretches out and then snaps back, right? So if you stretch out the muscle, you do like a static stretch, and this is me just I'm just guessing. This is not my area of expertise. I'm just making a logical thought here, right? So if I were to stretch the muscle, right, well then I would it's gonna have some um, you know some stretched out part of it, and then it's not gonna fire quite as fast, right? I think I don't really know for sure, but that's what makes sense to me. So because I do know that there's something called a stretch shortening cycle where basically the muscle stretches and then kind of snaps back. So it's like if I bring it back here, I'm all stretched, and then I bring it down, I'm going to have that stretch shortening cycle. Whereas here's a good example: if you were going to jump, right? If you're going to jump as high as you could, right? What you would generally do, if you watch people who do like the vertical jump tests, right? What they do is they put their arms up and then they go down and then they jump right back up, right? What you won't see any of them go like this and hold it and then jump up, right? Because then you're not getting that stretch shortening cycle. You're not getting that where you're stretching and then snapping it back. You're stretching it and then it's kind of holding it, and then you're not going to get that explosive up with it. So I'm guessing that's kind of what's happening with your stretching. You're probably stretching, and then your things are kind of getting stretched out a little bit, right? Which is a good thing in a general sense. But to perform athletically and to have that kind of explosive, club head speed, right? To get those explosive athletic moves, you don't necessarily want the muscles to be stretched out, right? So what I would actually recommend doing is maybe stretch if you're going to do stretching, which would be good to increase your flexibility, right? I would maybe do some stretching, if you're going to do static stretching, do it after the round, or do it in the evening. Do it when you're watching the news or whatever. If you watch TV in the evening, do it at that time, right? Just do, because to really get the benefits of stretches, again, not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that you kind of have to hold the stretch for a little while. So it can't be like 10 seconds or 30 seconds. My understanding is it's like 90 seconds to 2 minutes is how long you want to hold a stretch. And when you hold the stretch, you want it to be, it's not painful. So if you start wincing, you're pushing too far, right? So basically you want to stretch to the point of where maybe you're about to wince, but you don't wince, right? And then that's kind of where you want to be. And then over time, if you do it, you will be more flexible and so on and so forth. So dynamic stretching is what I would recommend doing. Like I said, what I do is I just swing the club. I start with shorter swings, build up to longer swings, and then I go from there. Right now, if you are doing dynamic stretching, before a round, maybe it's not exactly what I'm saying, but maybe you are. Then to be honest with you, I don't really know why you're losing club head speed. Maybe what I would try doing is loosen up by literally just swinging the club. try that, because that's what I do. And I haven't seen any departure from that. I mean, if anything, it helps me to swing faster, right? So that's what I'd recommend doing. Just start with kind of like some waist level to waist level. Once you kind of start to feel where you're nice and loose there, go 3/4 to 3/4, right? And then once you start feeling loose there, go to the full swings. And then once you start getting loose there, try to kind of like speed it up a little bit. And then that's pretty much all I really do. Once I do that, the blood's gotten the blood flowing a little bit. I've loosened up the muscles that swing the club, because that's what I was just doing, right? And that's what I found works the best for me. And then if you have trouble areas that tend to be more stiff, you may want to do specific dynamic stretches for that. So what you can do is you can just you can go to that book like what I talked about, or what you can do is just do a YouTube search of dynamic stretch for whatever the stiff area is. So if it's, let's say it's your back, let's say it's your knees, let's say it's your elbow, your neck, whatever it might be. For the neck, I can tell you a pretty good one for that. Basically, you just kind of do around and round. So basically, to do a dynamic stretch, basically what I would recommend doing is just go the full range of motion of whatever the joint is. So if it's a shoulder, right? If it's shoulders, a simple dynamic stretch would be just kind of doing arm circles, kind of going like this, right? And then go the other way. That will kind of get the whole joint kind of loosened up, right? You're getting blood flowing through there. If you're, this is one that I see that a lot of players do, right? Well, they'll, if they're kind of with their hip, they'll kind of swing their leg, kind of that way and that way, kind of hold themselves, swing the leg. That gets it in there. Squats are a good one. So if your knees and everything, just kind of doing some body weight, squats where you kind of go down and up a few times. Maybe the first one might be, hear a lot of cracking and stuff like that. It might be not as big of a squat. And then as you get looser, you can do a little bit more. Again, gets the blood flowing through everything. So those would be kind of examples of it. But there's probably tons of really good ones on YouTube that I'm not even thinking about. All right. So Pete G says, thanks for the explanation on bowing the wrist. Completely got it. One follow-up question. Is the club face closed at the top of the swing? So that's a tough question to answer, because it's like the club face isn't anything at any point other than impact, right? Now the club face can be more open or closed in certain areas, but it's hard to define what open or closed is when you're not hitting the ball, right? At a certain point in the swing, right? So what I would say is that if you're struggling leaving the face open, it would probably benefit you by having the face more closed than what it is right now at the top of the swing, right? Generally speaking, when you look at better players, if you look at the angle of the forearm here, and then you compare that to the angle of the face, generally I like to see the club face a little bit close to that forearm, right? So if I'm at the top of the swing here, right, and you draw a line on my forearm, and then you draw a line on the leading edge of the club face, you can see how that's a little bit closed, right? That would be open, right? That's definitely open to my forearm. You can see I cupped my wrist to make that happen. And then if I really bow my wrist a ton, then that club face is more closed. But it's not necessarily open or closed, because there's no reference of what open or closed necessarily is, because you're not hitting a ball. So it's I don't like to say the club face is open or closed. I like to say we need to get the club face more open or closed at a certain position, because there's no reference to what square actually is, because a lot of that depends on how you work through the ball, how you release the club, and all that kind of stuff. It only matters what open and closed is at impact. That's the only thing that matters, right? So it's hard to say, is the face open or closed at the top, because there's really no reference for what open or closed is. because we're not hitting a ball at the top of the swing, right? So, but generally speaking, if the club, when you look at a lot of the best players, a lot of times that club face is a little bit closed to the forearm. Some players, it's a little bit more. So, like Dustin Johnson, for example, we talked about him earlier. His club face is crazy shut at the top of the swing. Crazy shut. Like he's got a neutral grip where he's more like this, right? So thumb not going down the top. It's more like this, a little bit on the side there. So if you think about it, like the top of the grip is 12 o'clock. This side of the grip is 3 o'clock. He's probably at like 131, right, for his grip. And then at the top of the swing, he's like this. Well, look at my club face. It's crazy shut, right? So, for him, what he does is he actually lessens that as he comes down, so that bow isn't near his bowed, right? And at impact, he's basically like this. He has a ton of shaft lean, and his face or his wrist is a little bit bowed, not near as much as it was at the top of the swing. So there's different ways of doing it. Obviously, that way works really, really good for him. I think I heard him talking about why he does that in some interview. Basically, I think he was talking about how he knew he needed to get the club face more closed, so he's just like, why not just do it right away? So that's what he does when he brings the club. He does kind of like a forward press, and then as he brings it back, he basically shuts it, and then when he comes down, he kind of undoes some of that bow, right? But for him, it works great. May not work great for you, but it works great for him. So, yeah, there's no exact opener close. What I would say is that if you're tending to leave the face open at impact, I would probably try to get the club face more closed at the top than where it is now, because a lot of what we do in the downswing is a reaction to what the club is doing at the top, like in the transition of the swing. So when I say transition, I mean going from the backswing to the downswing, right? So going in between those things, if the club face is very open, we may, as we talked about earlier, we may come down steep as a reaction to that, right? So it would probably benefit anyone who's coming down steep with the face open to try to get the club face more closed, so that way you're not at the top of the swing, so that way you're not incentivized to come down steep. We actually be incentivized to shallow out the club. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, we got probably about 30 minutes left here, not quite 30 minutes. Keep the questions coming if you got them. Be happy to answer them for you. If there's any questions about like the blue brick, the BX1 wedge, any of the training aids or anything like that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. I know a lot of people kind of wonder about that stuff. There we go. So I'll just go ahead and kind of talk about the BX1 wedge, since nobody has any questions. So this is it right here. Kind of give you a close up if you want to see. You can see there, it's a high lofted wedge. Got the dual exhaust on the back. I kind of joke with Clay, the design makes it look like it's got it's like a pickup truck with a dual exhaust. It's a great looking club. Personally, that was one thing I know that Clay. There have been clubs. There are clubs out there that are similar to this, but a lot of them are just ugly, right? Like the alien wedges, those don't look great, to me. Even like the C3i is a great performing club, but man, it just didn't look very good, right? I love the pretty much blacked out. We got a black grip, black shaft. This is also a graphite shaft, whereas I don't think any of the other ones out there have a stock graphite shaft. I think you could probably get one maybe installed, but this one just has it in there with it. Blacked out head, kind of gray accents and stuff like that, make it look really, really nice. But basically, if you are someone that has no issue getting out of the bunker, right, this club really isn't for you, right? If you're a great bunker player with a conventional wedge, this club is not for you. This club is more for folks that really kind of struggle getting out of the bunker because of the wide sole, the high bounce, and the chamfer on here. So there's a little chamfer right here. It really helps it to kind of get through the sand. And because it's high lofted, you don't have to square up. You don't have to open up the face. So generally, with a conventional wedge, I'm going to have to way open up the face and wide stance, and I'm going to have to take it like a little different swing. I'm going to have you actually kind of want to come down steep, when you're hitting those shots to kind of help the club get underneath the ball, but then you use the bounce to get it to come up out of it. The cool part about this club is you literally just take the same swing as you would as if you were in the middle of the fairway. So same stance. I'm just going to have the ball in the middle of my stance, right? And all I need to do is make sure that I hit the sand behind the ball and accelerate through it, and that ball will come out nice every single time. Now, if you are in, a lot of folks are hitting out of bunkers that are like packed down and things like that. If you do like the normal, what I just did there, what may happen is the club won't get into the sand at all. And basically, because this is so anti-digging, it may actually bounce off of that and you may end up sculling it. So if you're ever in that situation, basically all you do, instead of the ball being in the middle of the stance, I'm going to have the ball more back in my stance. And I want to actually kind of feel like I hit down aggressively into that sand because I need to get the club underneath the ball, right? And this would be the same, not exactly the same for hitting a normal wedge, but it's just one little adjustment. You just put the ball further back in your stance, hit aggressively, and what that does is that allows you to hit more down into the sand better to help the club to get underneath the ball. So it works great out of those bunkers as well. But any questions about this? I saw that a question just popped up on there. But any other questions about that, I'll be happy to answer. So let's keep going here. So John R says, what does taking the club back wide mean, and how wide is too wide? So I would need to kind of know the context to exactly, but here's my interpretation of it. My interpretation of it is just not having as much wrist hinge, right? I wouldn't say that there's no, if you look at Bryson, he has a super wide takeaway where basically he has zero hinge to here, right? He plays really great golf doing that. So I wouldn't say that there's a point to where it's too wide. Generally, I like to see, I'd rather see wider than narrower because typically, so if you go to the power turn course in the Top Speed Golf system, one of the first drills that you do is a wide takeaway drill. And the reason is that if you hinge the club up very quickly, it tends to not, most people will tend to not get a full turn when they do that. Because essentially, we're sensing that this club is back far enough, and then they kind of keep going. We kind of end up like this, where we don't really have much turn, right? I'm exaggerating, but that's generally what I see. So if I get a nice wide takeaway where I have little to no wrist hinge, and I take that to club parallel, so you can see here, I have a little bit of wrist hinge here. You can see how much my shoulders have moved, right? And if I have a nice wide takeaway, the only way I can really get that club to go back is by turning my hips and my shoulders and getting nice and wound up. So I don't really have a point of where it's too wide. Now, that doesn't mean on an individual basis that you may hit the ball better with less of a wide takeaway. But what I like to see is at least by the time the club is parallel to the ground, I want to see the hands clearly on this side of your body, right? So if I'm right here, it's too narrow, right? I'm going to tend to not really turn my shoulders very much. Now, if you're doing that, you're hinging it up very quickly, and you're nailing you get a great turn, you get great lag and release it and all that stuff. that's great. You don't really need to worry about it, right? But generally, I don't really see that. Generally, I see when we hinge it up very, very quickly, we don't turn as much, and we also tend to cast the club because the moment where you kind of reach that full hinge point is generally the moment we want to unhinge it, right? So if I'm hinging it very, very quickly, when I'm at the top, I can't really create more lag, right? So you either need to kind of keep this lag, or what most people do is they're going to go like that. They're just going to throw it out right away. So yeah, that's why we go toward a wide takeaway. But to know whether you should have a super wide takeaway like Bryson, or more in this area, like kind of the minimum that I showed you, that's really just going to come from experimentation, right? Seeing what works best for you. What I have found generally, the wider is typically better. Just because it just gets your shoulder, just gets you wound up a lot more, and allows you to be able to create more speed, which is a lot better for playing golf. All right, so I want to read the rest of what he said. It looks like he pointed another one here. So sometimes I feel like I take it back so wide, the weight goes over the right foot on the backswing. Can you discuss the extremes of not wide enough and wide on the backswing? So it should be over the right foot. You should be shifting your weight to your right side. Absolutely. You don't want to be staying on your lead side. Not for like a full swing where you're trying to get power. Like a pitch shot, I love staying pitches and chips. I basically stay forward, right? Because I'm not trying to get power on those shots, right? I'm trying to have control. I want to control where I'm hitting the ground much easier. I want to control, you know, I want to have more control of what's going on. So I basically feel like my lead leg is more anchored with the weight there. So for a chip, I'm basically everything's kind of forward, right? Weight's forward, stays forward, and then that helps me to hit the ground in the same spot more often. But if I do that in a full swing, I'm going to tend to, one, probably hit down on the ball too much, and two, I'm going to tend to not have as much speed, and ultimately less distance. So I recommend when you take that wide takeaway, we want it when you get right here. That weight should be, most of your weight should be right here on your right foot anyway. So I think that's a good thing, unless I'm misinterpreting. So you went in and said again. So John R says, I think I misinterpreted wide. I think I'm separating my right arm away from my body, taking my weight over my right foot. Good to know wide is more related to wrist hinge. So again, your right arm should move away from your body. You don't, this idea that we want to stay connected, again, that's going to be very, very bad for distance, right? So if you imagine, like, I took a belt and wrapped it, around my bicep here, and kept that into where basically my bicep area is stitched essentially to my body, right? And let's say I make a swing like that. Well, that's as much as I can come back, right? Now, this doesn't look bad necessarily, right? I can get the swing to kind of look good doing that, right? I can get the club to come down on a good plane. The problem with it is that it's just not going to be very powerful, right? Now, there are players that do that. Matt Kuchar is one of them, who really kind of stays, his arm basically doesn't move away. But Matt Kuchar is not a real long hitter. And he's a tall and lanky guy too. So he has plenty of leverage to kind of make up for that. Whereas, some of us who are not, as tall, I'm 5'11" on a good day, 5'10" when I have to tell you what my real height is. It's, we don't have the leverage. So we got to separate that arm away from the body, right? So, the difference is like, I'm not going to be able to create very much speed from here. Like, I'm getting a good turn. Like, this is a good turn, but I'm just not going to be able to create a lot of speed from here. Now, if I go from that to that, well, now, shoot, I can create a lot more speed from this position, right? So I wouldn't worry about your right arm separating from your body. That should be what happens, because that means that you are getting that club elevated, right, to help you to create more speed and hit the ball farther. tell you what, golf is a lot easier when you hit the ball farther, right? I understand that there's a part of us that wants to stay controlled, right? But you have to have a good mix, right? If you are restricting, and I've also found that restricting your movement tends to lead to a lack of control because when you restrict yourself, you're doing something that is generally going to be unnatural for you to do. And a lot of times you lose the accuracy from doing that, even though you might be trying to stay connected to create accuracy, right? Because we know we're trying to hit this ball with speed. So your body just wants to separate to create that speed. But if you're restricting yourself, again, that may go against that. So I find that golfers tend to hit the ball better when they kind of do more what's natural to them. Now, if what is natural to them is, coming over the top and, things like that, then we will need to change that, right? But if you're doing what is natural to you, and you are, you're getting the club to work down on a good plane, you're squaring up the face nicely at impact, you're hitting the ground in a good spot, not hitting the ground too much behind the ball. You are hitting the ball in the middle of the face. Like that's all really the ball cares about. The ball doesn't care if you're connected or not. All it cares about is the direction the club face is pointing at impact, the direction that club head is moving through impact. If you hit it in the middle of the face, right? If you make ball first contact, right? It cares about that. It cares about the loft that you're presenting, right? So if you have more shaft lean, there'll be less loft, right? And then if you have less shaft lean, there'll be more loft. The ball will go higher and not as far with more loft. The ball will tend to go farther and lower with less loft, right? It cares about the speed of the club. Those are the things that the ball cares about. So anything that you're worried about in your golf swing, the way I would think about it is how does it relate to those pieces, right? So again, those pieces are ground contact, strike location, base angle, club path, speed, and shaft length, right? Those are basically all those things. Now there are other data parameters. Like you might be thinking, well, what about angle of attack? Well, if you're making ball first contact, odds are your angle of attack is in a really good spot, right? Now I have run into some situations where maybe the angle of attack is too much downward. We're chopping down too much into the ball, but I just don't see that very, very much. Most of the time it's the opposite, right? Where we actually need to get the angle of attack to be more downward because we're hitting chunks and thins. And a lot of times that's just from not getting the body forward enough to be able to get the bottom of the swing arc to be in front of the ball, right? So yeah, that's everything that you do in your golf swing has to be to improve those things because that's what the ball cares about. And that's what the top speed golf system is. The top speed golf system is all about putting you in the position to be able to do those things. So if you think about the stable and fluid spine, we call it, Clay calls it the number one key to consistency in the golf swing. And the reason is because it has a pretty large effect on a lot of those parameters that I just mentioned, those impact parameters. So if you imagine for ground contact, right? Let's say I go up to the top of the swing, I lean my body that way, right? So I'm leaning my spine angle this way. Well, if I kind of stay like this, I'm going to chop down into that ball, right? So most people aren't going to do that. So what a lot of people will do when they're like this is they'll fall back to get the spine to be more angled away, right? Because this feels like I'm just going to hit the ball into the ground. This feels like I'm going to get the ball up in the air, right? So that's what a lot of people do. And now I'm chunking and thinning the ball, right? Because I'm having to fall back. Also, if my spine angle is leaning toward the target at the top, what's my club path going to do? It's going to tend to do that, right? If you think about it, if you ever skipped rocks across the water, how do you angle your body to do that? When I skip a rock across the water, I'm not doing this because it's hard to get that rock or my arm to match the level of the water to get it to skip. If I'm skipping it, I'm more like this, right? And that's what we want to be in the golf swing, right? Because essentially that's very similar movement. Essentially what we're doing with this golf club is we're just throwing it into the ball, right? So it's a very similar movement to skipping a rock across the water there. So, so yeah, it has an effect on that. As if your eyes are moving all over the place, if your eyes are moving that way and that way, it's going to be hard to coordinate a center face strike, right? You're going to tend to not be as fast either, right? Because you're having to fall away. You're having to make a compensation to get the club to be on the right track. You're not going to be able to swing fast when you do that. Face angle, it can have an effect on that because it's just going to be harder to kind of control things when the spine's moving all over the place. When you look at the better players, they're angled away at rest. They stay angled away at the top. The spine shifts forward, right? The hips get opened up, and we're more like this at impact. That's what you're going to see with the best players, right? So that's why stable foot spine is the number one key to consistency. It has a large effect on many of those variables of impact, right? So that's that part. Power turn, that's all about speed, right? It can also play a role in the other areas because if you shorten your swing, if you don't make as good of a turn as you can, you're going to try to get power from somewhere. And a lot of times that's like rushing the downswing, casting the club. That leads to those things. And when you do that, again, you're going to have trouble controlling the face, controlling the ground contact, controlling your strike, all those things. So that's why I recommend getting a good turn. I mean, the main benefit is getting more club head speed. And the benefit of that is you're going to hit the ball farther, and it's so much easier to play golf when you hit the ball farther, right? So that's that. And then the lag, again, a benefit is speed. A benefit is more easily able to get shaft lean at impact to, have the shaft lean and compression to also help you to hit more down on the ball if you're struggling with an early release. If you don't have any shaft lean at contact, lag is kind of the first part of that. That's a big part of it. So it affects your ground contact. It can affect your speed. It has a large effect on many of those things. Compression line. So that's the line that goes from my lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder, right? I want that to be in a nice straight line. And for an iron shot where I need to hit down on the ball to make ball first contact, right? I want that to be pretty vertical, right? So if I'm in contact here, I essentially want my lead shoulder to be, if you draw a line straight up from my ankle, I want it to be right on top of that, right? Because that's going to help me to hit down and through the ball. If I'm coming into contact and I'm very angled away like this, I'm going to tend to hit the ground behind the ball. I want to be more like this. Now, if you're someone who has a ton of shaft lean, like a Dustin Johnson's pretty angled away. He's kind of like this at impact, but he has a ton of shaft lean at impact that makes up for it, right? That when you have a lot more shaft lean, you're going to hit the ground a little bit later. When you're like most of us who don't have a ton of shaft lean, and honestly, most of us don't need that much shaft lean either. I can get into that after this, but again, yeah, that plays a big part of it. So your ground contact's really, really affected by that. Your shaft lean can be affected by it as well, because if I'm angled away, I'm going to tend to not have my hands in front. Again, you're not going to compress the ball as much. The release, again, this is about shaft lean, right? This is about controlling the face better, the way that you release it. This is about hitting the ground. It affects where you're hitting the ground, right? The release has a huge effect on all those variables. Shallowing out the club, that's all about your club path, right? So if I'm coming down steep and over the top, my club path is going to tend to be out to in. I'm going to tend to hit pulls, slices, pull hooks, and that's if I make solid contact. A lot of times I'm not going to make solid contact, right? So the 20-minute shallowing fix, that's a course to help get your ball flight in a good spot, your face and your path to be in a better place. The 20-minute distance fix, that's all about speed, right? So a lot of these courses that we have, like the bread and butter courses, which I would say the key courses that we have are the top speed golf system. This is for full swing, by the way. So for the full swing, top speed golf system, 20-minute distance fix, 20-minute shallowing fix, and then the ball striking masterclass. All right. So the first three that I mentioned, the top speed golf system, the 20-minute distance fix, and the 20-minute shallowing fix, these are all technique related courses, meaning we're talking about how you move, right? Being in the right positions to be able to get good contact, right? The ball striking masterclass is all about building skill, right? So it's your awareness of where you're hitting the ground, where you're hitting it on the face, and things like that. So the way I look at technique is how you move. Skill is your ability to control the way that you move, right? So you can have a beautiful looking golf swing and hit terrible golf shots, right? And that's just because your ability to control the way that you move is not as high, right? I run into this every now and then in the online lessons where I get a student that is a high handicap golfer, right? 15 or more, let's say, or even 10 or I'd say double digit, right? They're a double digit handicap, so 10 or more, and they have a beautiful looking golf swing. They're nailing all the pieces of the top speed golf system, and when I say nailing, I mean they're nailing it as good as any pro is, right? They're shallowing out the club. Their club head speed is good, right? But they're a 10 handicap. So what gives? Well, some people, sometimes it's a situation where the short game is really bad, right? Because they focus so much on the long game with the full swing that they've neglected putting and chipping and things like that. Sometimes, I mean, I would say that that's often a part of it, but a lot of times, they have these beautiful golf swings, but they're just very inconsistent, right? And that's because the skill level is down. So if you want to kind of look at it, right? So we look at for technique at their handicap level, they're like in the 99th percentile. Nobody at that handicap level there's going to be very few players that have as good as technique as they do, right? But if you look at the skill level, they're probably way down on the opposite, maybe the 10th percentile for that handicap level. Because I'm sure a lot of you know someone who has a crazy looking swing or hits a big slice, but just is consistent, right? They hit that big slice, but they know where it's going every time, right? Well, that means that they're pretty highly skilled. Their ability to control that slice is pretty good, right? Now, ideally, they wouldn't slice it. If they want to kind of take the next level in their golf game, they probably get to where their face and their path are much closer to zero, right? But, there's a lot of those guys. I knew a lot of them growing up that hit big slices and were single digit handicaps. And it's just because they're good at controlling it, right? So that's what the ball striking masterclass is. It kind of teaches you how to practice. Most of your tour players that you see are not working on like big swing changes and stuff like that. Many of them aren't at all. Like their swing is their swing, right? And they just focus on continuing to build their skills, right? So the way that you do that, let me get a quick drink here. We got a couple more minutes and then we'll wrap it up here. But the way that you would do that would be basically the best way is to do variability type drills. So what that means is, here's an example of what a variability drill could be. Let's say you struggle with ground contact, right? You struggle with chunks and thins and things like that. And from a technical standpoint, you're able to do it. It's just that you're inconsistent with it, right? So what that means is we have a big dispersion with where we're hitting the ground. And what we need to do is we need to shrink that dispersion down. And the best players in the world have a much smaller dispersion, right? So what we may work on is a variability drill where we use a principle that's called win, pass, lose, stay. So what that means is if I'm successful, meaning I win, then I'm going to pass and I'm going to move on to the next task. If I'm unsuccessful, meaning I lose, then I'm going to make an adjustment and I'm going to repeat the task. So in doing this, you're going to be doing it's different every time. Your swing, what you're trying to do should be different every single time, because even if you lose and you're attempting to do the same thing, you have to make some sort of an adjustment to correct that, right? So let's say we're going to do win, pass, lose, stay. I got 3 tasks. One task is to hit the ground where the circle is. Another task is going to be to hit it in front of the circle, but before that line. And another task is going to be to hit it behind that circle, but in front of the end of these lines, right? So one will be like that. Another one will be in the circle, right? And another one would be like that in between, right? So we got 3 different tasks to do here. and I'm going to count the total number of reps that it takes me. And you have to predetermine which one you're going for. You can't just make a swing and say, oh, I got the circle, I'm going to count that, right? Yeah, you have to predetermine like what I'm doing. So my intent on this first one here is to be able to get the ground contact right in the circle, right? So if you look there, you probably can't see it, but I was a little bit before the circle. So that's a failure, and I need to get more forward, a little bit more forward to get the ground contact to be in the circle. So I'll make a little adjustment here, and boom, got my body a little bit more forward and got the ground contact to be right in the circle, right? So now I'm up to 2 reps. Now I'm going to go with the front one, right? So I want to get it between the end of the circle and the end of that line. And again, I'm setting up the same way every single time. I'm setting up as if there's a ball here. And I hit right in the circle. So I got to get my body more forward. That's a failed attempt. There we go. Perfect. Got it right in front there. All right. So that was my second attempt there. Now I'm going to try to get it behind the circle, but in front of the end of the line. Right. And I got it on the first try. So that took me 5 total attempts. That's my score. I'm going to keep doing that drill until I can get 3 out of 3, no failures. Once I do that, then I'm going to make the drill more difficult. If I keep doing that over time, my skill with my ability to hit the ground is going to increase, and my dispersion is going to get smaller. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. We're after 4. So I'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you have questions, please post them in there beforehand. So that way we just have a bunch of questions we can go over to start with. And I think it'll be more fun that way. That way I'm not improvising the whole thing. I don't know if you guys even want to hear about some of the stuff that I talk about. The stuff that I think is interesting, you may not find interesting. So yeah, do that. And then again, if you missed the answer to your question, you can always check out the archived office hours, which there should be a link below the video where you can see that. All right. So thanks everybody. We'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you next time.